Welcome to Global Conversations, Round 3, The View from 30,000 Feet. I'm absolutely honored and delighted today to be interviewing the semi-newish Executive Director of Dance NYC, Alejandra Duque Cifuentes. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hello, Liza. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Tell us about you. Start the day you were born and then go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Alejandra Duque Cifuentes. I am a white Latina immigrant from Medellín, Colombia, by way of Miami, and I've been working in the New York City arts and culture community for nearly 15 years now. I started in New York City as a teaching artist and community organizer through my faith-based church organization that I was a part of, and I've actually come from the world of theater and devised performance. And so I was a teaching artist for many, many years, and also was creating new works and developing programs in the theater world, and started to move into site-specific work that led me almost exclusively into dance and to dance-making work. I was working as a stage manager and production manager, and was engaging in a lot of touring. And in 2015, I started dating the person that is now my husband, and decided that I needed to try to be in New York for more than a weekend at a time, and that I really wanted to give that a shot, and also had grown really weary from the exhaustion of teaching, and from being a gig worker, really a freelancer, and being in a completely different borough every day of the week, whether it was rehearsing or teaching or addressing a community need, and was really in need of some stillness. And that prompted me to focus exclusively in administrative work. I applied to work at Dance NYC. I started as a temporary employee, the symposium coordinator, producing the 2016 symposium, and then eventually moved into the full-time capacity as the manager of programs at the time, and eventually went on to direct our programming and justice initiatives, and now I am the executive director.
That's wonderful. So do you feel like you're a New Yorker yet, or is your heart still in Miami?
Oh, I'm a New Yorker. Absolutely. I am absolutely a New Yorker. Too many years here, and at this point, you know, this crisis has really affirmed the reality that while many folks have left and fled the city, while the highest earners have decimated the economy and the you know, their relationship to this place as a playground, those of us that have remained in the communities that have long been here, I've renewed my commitment to this place. I know that this is my home. This is the community that has seen me grow and that I have sown into. My husband is Queens born and raised. In our home, we say Queens forever. We live right near City Field. And so I am pretty certain that we will be here for the long haul.
It does sound like you're embedded. It sounds like you were formerly the busiest woman in the world, going 15 different places, but I'm sure you're extraordinarily busy now. Do you still have any time to make your own art? Is that kind of on a back burner? Do you feel like you'll go back to it someday?
I do not make my own art, in that I am not in the process of developing any new works or engaging in my own projects, but I'd like to say that my work as an artist, which my artistic discipline is theater direction. That's where I started, and I was also involved in a lot of dance and physical theater. So I wasn't formally trained in ballet or any of the Eurocentric dance forms. I was certainly a dancer back home in Colombian folkloric dance, but I am more of a director type, and definitely have to say that my artistic muscles are flexed very much in my current position as executive director, and previously as a programmer and curator of the organization. So I feel very lucky to have a role that allows me to both engage in the systemic change that I'm interested in enacting, and also that allows the my creativity to be a part of that process.
We're going to jump a couple of places. First, I think a lot of folks are familiar with Dance USA, but maybe less familiar with Dance NYC. Can you tell us about the relationship between the two organizations? What sets you apart? We're going to talk in a minute about some of the fantastic research that you all have done.
Absolutely. So Dance USA is the national service organization, and the jurisdiction that it serves is the entire United States. And it was founded over 30 years ago. Dance NYC was imagined it's going to be 20 years ago that actually we began as an idea. We started because local dance leaders and philanthropic partners here in New York City identified that there was a need for a city-specific service organization that was addressing the needs of the constituents here on a local level. And of course, because of the density of dance activity that was happening in New York City and still is happening in New York City. And so a survey was disseminated to the sector in 2001, and in 2002, Dance NYC was actually established as a program of Dance USA. At that time, Dance USA actually had several branch offices across the country, and we were one of those branch offices. Okay. Through time, Dance NYC operated and with very similar programs to Dance USA in terms of research, convening the sector. Our website has always been a classifieds for dance in terms of a place where folks can find work. And so we had similar services to Dance USA at the local level, really focused specifically on New York City-based dance organizations and dance workers. As the organization continued to grow and we needed to establish a bit more of a financial infrastructure, Dance USA and Dance NYC separated, and Dance NYC became an independent nonprofit. However, from our separation to date, we continue to work in alliance with Dance USA. And really our focus is to serve this specific geography. We serve the metropolitan New York City area, which includes the 5 boroughs of New York City, Hudson and Bergen County in New Jersey, Westchester, Nassau, and Suffolk County in New York State. The main difference between the organizations is that Dance NYC is not a membership-based organization like Dance USA, which means that any of our constituents have free access to all of our programs. They do not have to pay a service to have access to them, nor do they have to sign up for a membership to have access to them. So that's the main difference between the organizations. We do have a couple of programs that are very specific to New York City, and our grant making is specific to New York City and a bit more robust. But aside from that, we are sister organizations.
Do you have any other sister organizations? I know there's See Chicago Dance, which was started by the Chicago Community Trust. I don't know of anybody else like you. Are there similar organizations?
There are many dance service organizations across the country. There's See Chicago Dance, there's Dance Source Houston, there is Dance New Jersey, the Dance Resource Center in LA, the Boston Dance Alliance, I'm forgetting the name of the Alabama service organization in Cleveland. There are many dance service organizations across the country. Some folks are more focused on education. Some folks are more focused on direct service provision to individual dancers. Others are more focused on organizations. Dance NYC is somewhat similar to Dance USA in that we are working at the 50,000-foot view. So we don't necessarily provide a lot of one-to-one direct service to individuals, but rather we are working at the advocacy level and at the aggregate level of the sector here in the city.
It's been a year, I guess would be one way to look at things. So there's a number of sort of cataclysmic changes going on. Let's look first at some of the discussions and the activism coming out of George Floyd's death and protests, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, before we move on to the impact of COVID, which has been devastating to the arts community. So let's talk a little bit about your work around that and what do you think is going to be, what changes are needed and how your organization is working to make those happen.
When I came into my position of executive director at Dance NYC, one of the things that I shared with the board and with the staff in terms of my vision for how to best support the field was, I articulated that as a service organization, we had to be aware of and in relationship to the ecosystem that impacts the lives of individual dance workers and the organizations that they create and are a part of. And what that means is that dance workers do not live in a vacuum. They don't just make dance and that's it. They are human beings that are alive in time and space. And therefore, they are impacted by the environment that they are working and living within. And that means what their social positionings are, what their identities are, what their relationship to class, race, and gender are, what their relationship to the current geography that they might be in are. And so in order to best serve them, we had to be intentional about understanding and being a participant in creating systems that allow for them to thrive, which means that in order to help dance thrive, we had to help the people making dance thrive, which means we had to address the larger systemic issues that they were facing. And so in response to the very necessary resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is one of the largest civil rights movements of our time, Dance NYC has been in many ways doing a lot of what we had already been doing before this specific pivotal moment arrived, which was looking internally at our own operations and looking at how we function. What are our values? Who are we? What do we believe in? What is the kind of dance ecology that we want to help to nurture and to create? What is our role within that ecology? And really addressing the manifestations of white supremacy internally in our organization. And that has been actually a work in progress that began several years ago, actually, when I started in the organization. And the first step of that, which manifested through our release of our values of justice, equity, and inclusion in 2018, which we've been executing on and outworking all this time. And so when the protest came, for us, it meant a rehoning of those values, a slowing down, a looking at what was the immediate impact that our staff members were experiencing. One of the things that I tell folks in the sector is that in service organizations and in general in nonprofit, many of us create nonprofits or are in service positions because we intend to help the community. And sometimes we do that by putting ourselves as ransom for that work. And I really believe that if we are going to create an ecology that is healthy and thriving, that the very dance workers that we are most in relationship with first, which in my case, the staff that I have, they have to be the first beneficiaries of that justice, of that equity, of that inclusion. And so we started by looking inwards. We had also already through some time been engaging in very specific external facing programs to address specifically the inequitable distribution of resources, which is one of the most palpable ways in which white supremacy and inequity manifests itself in the dance community. Our research through time has shown that it's in the access to resources that oppression is most visible, and in having the right to exist and fully thrive. And so when I think about what this moment is and what it's requiring of our sector, is it's requiring us to first and foremost have a moment of slowing down and taking true inventory in what is our role in white supremacy. All of us have a role in contributing to white supremacy because all of us have been a part of, we're the fish in the water, right? White supremacy is not the shark that we all have to kind of go after and get rid of. It's the water that we're in. And so the first move has to be, well, what is my role within it? Where are the moments where I have been benefiting? Where are the moments when I can engage in interventions to interrupt how those systems are manifesting? So the first work is personal work. It's personal work that as workers and leaders and dance makers, we have to engage in. The next level of that work is in our institutions and in our collectives and how we work together and in how we are in relationship to our community. And then from there, thinking about some concrete strategies. one of the first ways to address systemic inequity is by putting resources and power back in the hands of the artists and the communities from which those resources were originally extracted from. The systemic oppressions that are manifest right now across the US and in our sector are in part due to extraction and due to lack of access. The second thing that I think a lot about in terms of putting resources back into the hands of artists and communities is also thinking about what is our role as leaders or as individuals. When are the moments when we have to move out of the way? When are the moments when we have to labor to further support the work of Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, artists, disabled artists, immigrant artists, communities who have been a part of the dance sector forever, and that we simply have not provided the rightful resources to them. So how can we support that work, and how can we move out of the way so that they continue to be the leaders of what they've always been leaders of, and just simply haven't had the resources to do at the same scale that some of the segments of our fields have had the capacity to do. And so the work of what is ahead of us as a sector is both internal, personal, institutional work, as well as external work in terms of programming, but more specifically in terms of the advocacy that we engage in as a sector. One of the things that has led to the devastation that we've experienced with COVID is that as a sector, we haven't really been a part of some of the really large conversations about labor, about rights, about housing, about land, about healthcare that inevitably actually impact us. And so this moment has really shifted what it means to be an artist. Not only are we ideating the future, not only are we creating beautiful things, not only are we telling the stories and preserving the stories of who we are and the communities that we're a part of, but we also are important members of civic society. And we need to engage in those conversations to ensure that we can also thrive within those spaces.
So, you know, it's one of the most interesting things you said, and I've never heard it expressed this way before, but it was great, that dancers don't live in a vacuum, and that the work has to be intentional. And we help dance thrive by helping the people making dance thrive, which I think is lovely, and focusing on the individuals. And to that point, I was very interested because I noticed that your COVID impact study, and I'm shifting a little bit here to COVID, it was something like the respondents, almost 70% of the respondents are female. 68.4% of the respondents are female. And in your wonderful study on workforce demography, which you did, I think 2016,
Yes.
65% of the respondents are female. So it sounds like the population you serve is somewhere between 2/3 to more of it is female. And we're seeing more and more statistics coming out about the impact of COVID on women. 865,000 women over 20 dropped out of the American workforce compared to 216,000 men. As you know, having been a gig worker, there's a massive gender pay gap in the gig economy already. And nobody's, I think, actually linked sort of workforce, women, demographics, but I'm wondering, I noticed that your COVID survey, which was fabulous, is updated just until May. I'm wondering if you all are thinking about asking why people are leaving the sector if they're leaving, because what we're hearing more and more is childcare, elder care, and when you mentioned sort of the ecosystem, the water that we swim in, I was immediately thinking of a mom holding a kid or trying to drag kids, help her kids swim with her, or her, grandparents, mom and dad, through this water. So can you talk a little bit about COVID, the impact? I know some people who have left New York haven't done so willingly. They've done so because the schools are opening, then they're closing, then they're opening again, and they've gone back home to family because they need the support to continue to make art.
The first thing I'll say actually is that we do have some statistical data that shows that women, and particularly white women, tend to be the most prone to answer survey collections. And so that's something that we always name because it is important to recognize that while we do know that the majority of the sector identifies as cisgendered women, the respondent size is also in relation to the reality that women tend to be the most willing to answer surveys for data collection. So that's something that feels important to name, because sometimes that impacts just how large the proportionate distance is, right? The other piece that I would say is we actually have data from June that will be updated very briefly. And additionally, we are in the process of disseminating a follow-up to that survey. And so in the coming months, we will have a new set of data that will further explain the motivation for why a lot of folks are moving. In New York City, one of the number one things that we've seen to be true, mostly through anecdotal survey responses, in terms of the migration of the workforce, is connected to rent. Rent and the absence of rent relief has been the number one factor that will determine the migration of the workforce, as well as the potential closures of organizations and businesses in the New York City dance sector. It's the one issue that is true for the individual and for the business. Rent and the affordability crisis around rent in New York City has really, really created an incredible burden to the sector and to the individual workers. Disabled dance workers have also experienced a disproportionate impact as a result of COVID, and many have fled also for that reason. And then, of course, immigrant and Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color dance workers are also disproportionately impacted. And in several studies that have been shared actually by New York City, you can see a correlation between where essential workers live, where those neighborhoods, the racial demographics of those neighborhoods, the income of those neighborhoods, and the cases of COVID and the number of deaths in those neighborhoods. And all of those things have actually correlated along race and class lines. And it's no different for the dance sector.
Oh yeah, it's Chicago. I mean, and actually the Hispanic population of Chicago has been hit asymmetrically hard, even vis-a-vis other minorities, because so many of them are involved in, essential work, including restaurants, et cetera. So unemployment, rent, et cetera, absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of, the workforce, for dance and for parents, this upcoming survey does have a series of questions that's focused specifically on some of those ecosystem-based relationships. So whether dance makers have proximity to family or friends, whether folks are caregivers, whether they have multiple dependents. Some folks might be parents, some folks might have elderly family members that they're in charge of their care and their support. Other folks might have different needs based on disabilities. So we actually will have a lot more information about what that impact is and how it correlates to the different demographic markers that we study, which include gender, sexual orientation, age, zip code, not immigration status, but country of origin, and race and ethnicity.
We interviewed Professor Zanny Voss at SMU Data Arts. She made a very conservative assumption, which was that the theaters would be reopening in October. Well, here we are in October, and that's not happening. The estimated aggregate impact, assuming everything got back to normal in October, was negative 6.8 billion, which is a deficit equivalent to 26% of the expenses of an average organization over the course of a year. I don't know if that's similar, better, worse in New York, but holy moly. And if we're not looking until opening until spring of next year, I don't know if you have any figures, but I can only assume that it's going to be, what's already extraordinarily bad is going to become catastrophic.
Yes. Well, they just announced yesterday that Broadway is closed through June of 2021. And so we're talking about a pretty pretty significant impact to the performing arts sector. As we know, Broadway tends to be an indicator of the commercial and financial viability of the arts sector in terms of its visibility. Though the New York City arts sector is incredibly large and incredibly dense, we're talking about Broadway in terms of theater. We're also talking about visual arts, the museums, the dance industry, etc. We, in our data, have found that there are different levels of losses for organizations versus individual workers. And for organizations, as of May, the losses, at this point were over at least $22 million as of May, only for dance organizations. And that is a portion of all of the dance organizations that otherwise could have taken the survey. And so we're talking about very, very large losses. We have already started to receive information on studios and dance centers that are in the process of closing or in danger of closing as of December of this year. Most of the different venues and organizations that we've worked with estimate that they'll be able to make it through 2021, but there is an absence of clarity of what happens after. And a lot of those estimates were from about a month ago, which at this point might as well be 2 years ago, because things are changing so very quickly that it's difficult to understand the size of the impact. Again, with the follow-up survey that we're undertaking right now, we do expect to have more accurate figures in terms of what 2021 looks like for folks and how people are having to pivot. In our conversations with members of the field, one of the things that has surfaced is this idea of, in order for us to survive, we may have to change our missions. We may have to change what does service delivery look like. What we've noted is that the folks that are experiencing the kind of harshest conditions are facilities owners or operators. Again, which gets tied to my original point of rent relief and fixed operational expenses connected to the management of a space is one of the hardest things to have to navigate right now. For organizations that do not own facilities, there is a little bit more nimbleness that is possible. There's a little bit more flexibility. It doesn't come without the cost of folks in our sector losing their jobs. It doesn't come with reduction of staffing. It doesn't come without the reducing of financial investment in the sector. But there is just a bit more flexibility that those members of the community have because they don't have these fixed operational expenses. Yep. In terms of the financial loss, what we've the average loss per survey responded in earned revenue was nearly $70,000. What we've seen is that the proportion of lost income is notably higher for the smallest budget organizations. And so that's something that is important to note. While the numerical figure is smaller in losses for smaller organizations, it is larger in proportion to their operating budgets. And so there's a real risk here that some of the smaller members of our sector might disappear with this crisis. Now, what's important to note is that in New York City, based on our 2016 data and our subsequent 2017 data on fiscally sponsored groups, the majority of the dance sector is actually comprised of small budget groups. And for us, small budget are folks with budgets under $1 million. And so if that portion of our sector, which is the lion's share of our sector, is the one that is losing the largest proportion of income, then we're seeing a significant threat to those small groups, which tend to be the ones that represent the demographic makeup of New York City the most. They are the most diverse, the most adaptable. They're also the ones that are most connected to hyper-local communities. So we're talking about members of our community that are important neighbors within their local neighborhoods, within a specific genre, within a specific legacy or tradition. And so it's a moment of pause for our sector and really will require us to think about how do we ensure that those that survive this moment are not just the large institutions, or are not just the already well-resourced institution, which, as you and I know, falls along race, class, gender, and immigration and disability lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point. The larger organizations, whether it's dance, any other cultural organizations, get the lion's share of the funding. And there's been some conversation around being more intentional in terms of how things go. But you and I both know that the biggest dance companies in the country are going to make it through in some way, shape, or form. But the smaller, more diverse, as you said, focused on their community, much more at risk. And I really think that has it makes me worry about the artistic conversation that's going on and the wealth of the diversity. That's an overused word. The kind of conversations that are being had, because if just the largest organizations survive, there's going to be a similarity of voices, or sort of one vision or just a couple of visions put forth, which I think is really, really troublesome. I would also argue that we saw that before anyway, because of cutbacks in staffing in arts criticism, dance journalism, newspapers generally. So a lot of organizations that don't make it to New York are doing great work. And similarly, journalists that previously had a travel budget who were based in New York to go see them, they can't do that anymore. So I think we're already narrowing the conversation more than we should. So when you go into work every day, there's so many challenges, there's so many priorities, so many people are asking for help. How do you pick? How do you prioritize? I don't envy you that.
So prioritization for me as an individual worker and for us as an organization starts really with what our strategic values and programs are, right? We are very clear that there are 5 things that we can do for this sector and that we can do well. We can convene them, we can do research to understand their needs, we can advocate on their behalf at the city, state, and federal level, we can bring together resources so it's fast for them to find what they need if we are not the people that can provide it, and we can put money in their hands. And so for us, the prioritization starts first with what we know how to do and can do well and efficiently, because that's where we will be able to go as far as possible. And that must and has to be connected to our values. If something is not a manifestation of those values, an active manifestation of those values, then it falls really much lower in the priority of whether we take something on or not. The second thing is responding to the immediate. So for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, the city was closed 1 week before our largest annual conference, and we paused that momentarily to focus on immediately disseminating the coronavirus impact survey and beginning the fundraising for the relief fund. And so that meant that there was an existing research study at the time that we're actually about to release next week, focused on small budget dance makers, that part of our sector. We paused that process, we paused the symposium, we paused their upcoming events to pivot into what the timely response required, which was COVID, providing research, resource, and money. And so typically that's how we make adjustments for what's needed. The other way that I address the never-ending mountain of work that we have, is by assembling an incredible team. I am not the only source of knowledge and expertise in the sector, and I'm certainly not the only the only source of knowledge and expertise in my team. And so I've assembled an incredible team of folks so that any single one of us can respond to the needs of the community as they come in. If I can't take a call or I can't answer an email or I can't join a conversation, other members of the team can do that and can support the members of our community. We stop and talk a lot as a team. We really, for example, when George Floyd was murdered, we stopped. We closed the office for multiple days. We had a moment as a team and we said, okay, what does this mean for us as people? what does this mean for us as a team? And how can we serve our community, not from a place of deficit, but from a place of resource? We do not take on projects that we do not have the resources to do. And that means the financial resources, the staffing resources, and the emotional resource. Social justice work comes with heavy, heavy emotional labor, and that labor is doubled and sometimes tripled for our Black and Indigenous staff members, for our Brown staff members. And so we really pause regularly as a team to have conversations about, okay, how are we doing? Do we need to shift deadlines? Do we need to move things back? Do we need to say no to something? Now, I gotta tell you, this balance, we haven't figured it out perfectly yet. For the folks that oversee departments in our team, you know, the density that they carry is significant. We haven't yet figured out the balance between wanting to react and respond with intention and clarity. There is a strong belief in the team and a strong love for the members of the community. And so there's a desire to, like, oh my God, if we can find a solution, let's find it quickly, let's do it, let's engage. And so there have been moments that we've had to slow down. In August, we closed the office for a period of 2 weeks. That had never happened in the history of Dance NYC. We made a very strong decision to cease all activity for the purposes of recharging so that our team could focus back on their humanities, because we really believe that, you know, we can't give of what we don't have. We can't model to the sector something that that we have to do it first before we can, you know, tell the sector, oh, this is what you should do. And so for us, it's still very much a dance of how do you both dream for something bigger and ideate something that serves more people, that is more efficient, while also doing it within the capacity and within the humanity of the people that have to steward it.
Yeah, we are probably running over, so I have one more question for you. What is the number one request, I mean, other than just cash, that you're getting from your community?
People want to be heard and seen. I think one of the things that we underestimate as a sector is that dancers and dance as a practice is a practice of the body and of movement. And it's not always a very vocal practice. And what we found both this year and how our city has responded to the arts and culture sector and generally is that folks sometimes feel alone. They feel forgotten. And one of the things that we have found people really truly long for is to be seen, is to be heard, and to be acknowledged, to not be forgotten as workers, to not be forgotten as a sector, to not be forgotten as an art form. We know that dance, of all of the artistic disciplines, received the least amount of funding. At least that's true in New York City. And you see it also reflected in how our policymakers and politicians are in relationship to our art form as well here in the city. And so aside from the very obvious financial needs that people have and being able to access resources, what they want is to be seen and to be acknowledged.
That's interesting, which also goes right back to what you're saying about training your team so that if one person can't take the phone call, somebody else can, so that you are having that relationship. Well, we could probably talk all the way through the weekend and into Monday, but I'm sure you want to go enjoy at least part of your weekend. Thank you so much, Alejandra Duque Cifuentes. She is the Executive Director of Dance NYC, and just a delight to speak with you. Looking forward very much to seeing that research coming out, and please send it to us. We would love to promote it and get it out there. It's incredibly important work. Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Liza.